It all started with a plain white envelope tucked into my mailbox, no return address, just a neatly printed, "From the Homeowners Association." I didn't think much of it. HOA notices weren't uncommon. Usually, it was a reminder about trash pickup times or some vague suggestion to keep bushes trimmed. But this one felt different from the moment I tore it open. "Dear resident," it began, all formal and passive-aggressive, "your display of the national flag violates our community's aesthetic guidelines." I had to reread that line 3 times before it really sank in. My flag? Violating aesthetics? I looked out the window at the simple 6-foot pole rising from the front of my yard, the stars and stripes waving gently in the breeze. The pole wasn't fancy. The flag wasn't oversized. It was clean, respectfully displayed, and lit at night with a small solar spotlight. Exactly how I was taught it should be. To be honest, it hit a nerve. My father, who passed away 5 years ago, served in the army for over 20 years. He wasn't a loud man, but he believed in honor, in sacrifice, in standing up for what was right. He taught me to fold the flag with precision, to stand still and remove my cap when the anthem played. That flag wasn't just a piece of cloth to me. It was memory. Family. Legacy. I called the HOA's listed number immediately, expecting maybe an apology or at least some kind of explanation. A mistake, I thought. Surely they didn't mean to come after someone's flag. But the woman who answered, with her chipper but clipped tone, made it clear. "Yes, sir, we've had a few complaints. The flagpole is considered a vertical structure and detracts from the community's modern neutral design. You'll need to remove it within 7 days or risk daily fines of $100. Modern neutral design." I almost laughed. Our neighborhood was built in the late 90s, a mix of beige stucco and dusty brick with identical boxy layouts. If anything, the flag gave the place some life. "You realize it's a U.S. flag, right?" I asked, holding back my frustration. "Yes, sir," she replied, sounding unfazed. "The rules apply to all decorations. It's not about the flag, it's about uniformity." I hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there for a while, just staring out the window, watching the flag flap in the breeze. The idea of taking it down made my stomach turn. But the thought of caving to such a ridiculous demand? That made my blood boil. So I made a decision. Not only was I not taking it down, I was going to make it better. That evening, I went to the hardware store and bought a new solar spotlight, brighter and more efficient than the old one. I picked up mulch and a few small shrubs to create a tidy flower bed around the base of the flagpole. Then I went home, got to work, and spent hours digging, planting, trimming. When I was done, it looked like something out of a landscaping catalog, a little circular garden with red, white, and blue petunias, clean lines, and a granite plaque I'd had made with my dad's name, rank, and years of service. The next morning, I snapped a picture and posted it on my social media page with a simple caption, *, "The HOA says this flag doesn't fit their aesthetic. What do you think?" I didn't expect much. Maybe a few supportive comments from friends. Instead, my phone started buzzing almost immediately. Comments poured in, hundreds, then thousands. People shared it, reposted it, sent messages of support from all over the country. Veterans chimed in. Families who had gone through the same thing shared their stories. News sites picked it up. Someone I didn't even know started a GoFundMe to help cover potential HOA fines. Within 48 hours, it had raised over $8,000,000. I was stunned. But what mattered more than the money was the momentum. I wasn't alone. I wasn't crazy. And I wasn't backing down. The HOA, however, wasn't impressed. 2 days after the post went viral, I got another letter, this one certified. Continued noncompliance will result in escalating fines and potential legal action. That's how they worded it. No mention of the backlash. No acknowledgement of how ridiculous they looked. Just cold, legal threats typed in Courier New. At this point, my neighbors started to notice, too. Carlos from next door, who normally kept to himself, stopped by with a six-pack and said, "Didn't know you had it in you, man. That flag looks damn good." Even Mrs. Peterson, the sweet lady down the street who was always pruning roses, offered to bring over some lavender to plant around the base. I realized something important then: most of us in this neighborhood didn't like the HOA. We just put up with it. Because it was easier to stay quiet than get involved. But this flag drama? It was so absurd, so over the top, that it woke people up. They didn't just see a man refusing to take down a flag. They saw someone standing up to the same petty nonsense that had fined their son for chalk drawings, or made them repaint their front door because the shade of blue was too bold. That week, people started talking. Whispering. Wondering who was really in charge. Who made these rules? Who enforced them? And why the board never seemed to be held accountable. What began as a fight over one man's flag was starting to feel like the spark of something bigger. And I had no idea how wild it was about to get. The storm had officially begun, and I was right in the center of it. After the viral flag post and the second HOA threat letter, things started shifting, quietly, at first. Neighbors who'd never said more than a polite wave started lingering during walks. A few brought coffee. One guy, Rick, came over with a lawn chair and just sat down next to the flag, nodding like he was guarding it. I didn't even know his last name at the time. The real change began when I dug into the HOA itself. See, most people just think of the HOA as some untouchable authority. You get a letter, you grumble, you comply. But no one really asks who's behind it. I did. I read through every newsletter, every boring PDF they'd ever emailed. Most people deleted them immediately, but I still had them saved in a folder, some habit from my corporate job. Turns out, the HOA board was made up of 5 people, none of whom were elected by any meaningful majority. Cheryl Simmons, the president, had been on the board for 8 straight years. I checked the last election record. You'd think it would be hundreds of votes in a neighborhood of 300 homes. But nope, *28 total votes cast. Cheryl had won her seat with 12 votes. That's all it took to make decisions for the entire community. Worse still, all meetings were held midweek, 10 a.m. at a rented room near the golf course. Who could attend that? Retirees. Maybe. Everyone else was working. It was designed that way, on purpose. Limited participation meant no challenges, no questions, no threats to their little kingdom. I started talking to neighbors more intentionally. Not just small talk, real conversations. I knocked on doors in the evening, introduced myself properly. Asked how they felt about the HOA. Most people hesitated at first, probably assuming I had some hidden agenda, but once I brought up the flag and how they tried to find me, the walls came down. "Oh, you're the flag guy," someone would say with a laugh. "I saw you online," another said. One guy told me how the HOA made his daughter take down a swing she'd tied between 2 trees, claimed it was a liability hazard. A woman around the corner said she'd been fined for having a hummingbird feeder visible from the street. I couldn't make this stuff up. I kept track of the worst stories, printed them out, and built a small binder. Not because I wanted to go full lawyer mode, but because I was building a case, not for court, but for change. The HOA's annual meeting was coming up in 6 weeks. And for the first time in years, 3 board seats were up for grabs. Most people didn't even know that. But I did. And I wasn't going to run alone. Carlos, my next-door neighbor, was an ex-Marine with a sharp mind and a zero-tolerance policy for nonsense. He was quiet, but he had a way of looking at people that made them tell the truth. I asked him over a beer if he'd consider running. He didn't even blink. "Hell yes," he said. "Been waiting for someone to ask." Then there were the Parkers, Jim and Elaine. Retired, in their 70s, but full of energy and fire. They'd been fined twice in the same month for wind chimes audible from the sidewalk and excessive garden decor. Elaine laughed when I brought up the election. "You mean we can actually run? We thought that was just ceremonial nonsense." I explained how the rules worked. Any homeowner in good standing could run for a seat. They were in. In just 2 weeks, we had 4 candidates, including me, and we weren't just running. We were organizing. I printed flyers. Nothing fancy, just black and white, bold text, straight to the point. Tired of the HOA nonsense? Time for a change. Vote at the annual meeting. Don't let 12 people decide for 300 homes. I put them in mailboxes. Taped them to light poles. Slid them under doors. I built a basic website and shared it on the neighborhood Facebook group. We called ourselves the Common Sense Committee. Not flashy. But real. Approachable. Human. Cheryl and her cronies noticed, of course. The next HOA email warned about unauthorized political campaigning, as if we were running for Congress instead of a volunteer board. I replied to the email with a screenshot of the HOA bylaws. Nowhere did it say residents couldn't share opinions or organize. I kept my tone polite. Professional. But the message was clear: you don't scare me. Things came to a head at the election meeting. It was the first time in anyone's memory that the room, this time moved to the community clubhouse at my insistence, was standing room only. Nearly 150 people showed up. Some were angry. Some were just curious. But they were there. And that alone changed everything. Cheryl opened the meeting with a tight smile, clearly trying to maintain control. But the room wasn't hers anymore. When it was time for candidates to speak, she gave a canned speech about protecting standards and preserving property values. Carlos got up next and spoke simply about fairness, about community. Jim and Elaine shared their story about the wind chimes, and the whole room laughed, not mockingly, but knowingly. Then it was my turn. I didn't use a microphone. I just stood there and said what everyone already knew. This community isn't about lawn heights and paint colors. It's about people. Families. Veterans. Kids. Neighbors. We shouldn't be afraid of our HOA, we should be proud of it. I pointed out the flag story, the national attention it brought, and the absurdity of trying to fine someone for honoring their father's service. Then I said, if you're tired of being managed like unruly tenants in a neighborhood you own, then vote for change. Not just today, but from now on. We passed out ballots. The votes were cast, counted right there. And when the results were read, the room erupted. Carlos, the Parkers, and I had won by a landslide. Cheryl's allies lost their seats. She barely held on to hers. Her face said it all: shock, anger, disbelief. She gathered her papers and left early, muttering something about rabble-rousers. But we weren't rabble. We were homeowners. Voters. Neighbors. And now, we were the ones at the table. The board had changed. The tone had changed. And the real transformation was just beginning. The dust hadn't even settled from the election when Cheryl decided to strike back. She might have lost her grip on the board, but she wasn't going down quietly. The very next morning, I got a knock on the door, not a letter, not an email, a knock. A man in a short-sleeved button-up shirt and khakis stood on my porch holding a clipboard. Morning. I'm with the county zoning department. Got a report about a possible violation on your property. I raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. The flagpole? He nodded, clearly embarrassed. Look, I'm just here to take a look. It's been reported as a commercial structure. That's a stretch, I know. I chuckled. You want coffee while you inspect? He actually took me up on the offer. As we walked around the yard, he glanced at the flag, the lighting, the garden. He jotted a few notes, snapped a photo, then said, "There's nothing here that violates zoning. This is well within residential use. Somebody clearly doesn't like you." "Yeah," I said, "I've got a pretty good guess who." He smirked and left without filing a thing. But Cheryl wasn't done. She started flooding the new HOA email inbox. Yes, we'd set up a public, transparent one, with complaints. Each one more absurd than the last. Unauthorized use of mulch, permanent lighting structure without approval, yard decor exceeding height limitations. I mean, it was endless. We responded with patience. With facts. With the exact bylaws she herself had used for years. And every time, she came up short. Her own rules. Her precious, finely tuned rules, were now weapons that we held. She tried one more power play, demanding we remove the new bylaw about flag displays. She claimed it hadn't been filed properly, that the vote didn't meet quorum. Unfortunately for her, we had video, attendance records, even signatures. It had been the best attended vote in HOA history. Her objections were overruled. Officially. What she didn't realize was that the tide had shifted, not just in the boardroom, but in the hearts of the neighborhood. People weren't afraid of her anymore. They laughed off her emails. They ignored her glares. And they started flying their own flags, everywhere. Small garden flags. Porch-mounted flags. Some military, some seasonal. One guy even put up a pirate flag for fun. It wasn't chaos. It was color. Expression. A neighborhood finally breathing. Then came the next issue, where to hold our upcoming HOA meetings. Traditionally, they were held at a local community center, a gray, soul-sucking room with folding chairs and fluorescent lights. But Cheryl's years of budget cutting to keep dues low had come back to bite us. The HOA couldn't afford the rental anymore. So we had a choice: pay out of pocket, find a cheaper venue, or, someone joked, just meet at my place. Mike's yard already has more seating than the clubhouse, Carlos said, grinning. Plus, I hear the barbecue's better. I laughed, thinking it was just a funny moment. But then Jim nodded thoughtfully. It's actually not a bad idea. Open air. People can bring chairs. We'd save a few $100. There was a brief pause in the room. Then Elaine said, "I second it." We voted right then. And just like that, the motion passed. The next HOA meeting would be held on my lawn, under the same flag they once tried to silence. I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Cheryl, still clinging to her seat, didn't say a word. She just scribbled something in her notepad and stormed out before the meeting ended. When the day of the first lawn meeting arrived, it felt like a block party. People brought lawn chairs, folding tables, coolers. Someone made cookies. A couple of kids were running around with sidewalk chalk, drawing rockets and stars and stick figures with flags in their hands. Carlos and I set up a few signs, just simple things: HOA meeting here and welcome, neighbors. My wife made lemonade. Jim brought over his old portable speaker so everyone could hear. And there, standing tall in the middle of it all, was the flagpole. Clean, proud, surrounded by blooming flowers and the low hum of summer conversation. We started the meeting promptly at 6 p.m. No formalities, no stuffy Robert's rules. Just updates. Questions. Ideas. And something remarkable happened. People talked. Not complained, talked star. They shared concerns about sidewalk repairs, praised a kid who'd been helping elderly neighbors with groceries, suggested a neighborhood picnic. It was community. Real community. Cheryl showed up halfway through, clutching a binder and looking like she was walking into enemy territory. She sat stiffly in a folding chair at the edge of the crowd. When we asked for suggestions, she raised her hand. I nodded. Go ahead. She hesitated, then said, I think we need to reevaluate the signage rules. Some people have gone overboard. A few neighbors chuckled. Someone whispered, she means the flags. But this time, no one gave her the floor to preach. Carlos gently responded, we'll review all guidelines this fall with community input. But the flag bylaw is here to stay. That vote was loud and clear. Cheryl pursed her lips and didn't speak again. As the sun began to set and the meeting wrapped up, people stayed behind, chatting, sipping drinks, letting their kids run wild on the grass. A few even came up to me, patting my shoulder or shaking my hand. Best HOA meeting I've ever been to, someone said. Feels like we actually matter now, said another. When it got late and most folks had gone home, I sat on the porch with Carlos, 2 beers between us. He looked out at the flag and said, you know, they tried to bury you with rules. I nodded. And instead, they just gave me the stage. We clinked bottles. Neither of us said it, but we both knew, this wasn't about a flag anymore. It was about control. About voice. About the right to stand for something when the people in power forget who they work for. And now, the very people who once silenced us had no choice but to sit on our lawn and listen. The summer faded into fall, and with it, a noticeable shift settled over the entire neighborhood. It wasn't dramatic. Not some overnight transformation, but like the slow turn of a leaf, the kind you almost miss until one day the whole tree is glowing. The mood had changed. People walked slower. Waved more. Kids started riding their bikes without that haunted, don't get yelled at for playing energy. And the meetings kept happening, right there, on my lawn. At first, I thought it was just a temporary thing. A novelty. Maybe people showed up for the story, the gossip, the spectacle of Cheryl forced to sit on the same lawn she once threatened to fine. But that wasn't it. They came back. Every time. The meetings began to feel like something more than just HOA business. They became community forums, little town halls under string lights and stars. People talked about block parties. Shared job postings. Offered babysitting trades. They brought folding chairs with their names written on masking tape like church pews. A few even pitched in to buy a small speaker system so everyone could hear without me yelling across the yard. Carlos joked once, you accidentally started a movement, man. Maybe he was right. But I didn't start it alone. I just refused to back down when someone tried to silence me with bureaucracy. Cheryl showed up to fewer and fewer meetings after that. At first, she'd sit stiffly and take notes, then mutter objections no one really listened to. But eventually, she stopped coming altogether. She sent an email saying she was taking a sabbatical from board duties. That sabbatical quietly turned into a resignation 2 months later. No one threw a party, but the sense of relief was tangible. After her exit, we made some real changes. First, we rewrote the bylaws, not to tear everything down, but to inject common sense into them. The new rules made clear distinctions between aesthetics and control. Want a garden gnome? Go ahead. Want to paint your door blue? Enjoy. Flags? Fly them. We only prohibited items that were dangerous, truly offensive, or obstructive. No more of that visible from the street nonsense. Then, we created a rotating meeting schedule. 1 month at my place, the next month at the Parkers, then the community green space. That way, it didn't feel like my yard was the permanent HQ, and it gave others a chance to host. People loved it. They decorated their lawns with little signs, baked cookies, and welcomed their neighbors with genuine excitement. And something I never expected happened. We got younger. Families who had been quiet, newer residents, renters turned owners, started showing up and offering to help. One woman, Tanya, organized a kids' art contest for decorating the bulletin board. Another guy, Malik, a software developer, offered to create a free app for neighborhood announcements. We were starting to act like a neighborhood instead of a subdivision. But the real full-circle moment happened during the winter meeting. It was cold enough that we had to hold it inside. So we chose the big clubhouse by the tennis courts, a spot the HOA hadn't used in over a year due to costs. But with smart budgeting and donations, we made it work. That night, nearly 200 people showed up. There were hot drinks, little plates of cookies, and Christmas lights strung up along the ceiling. We had an agenda, of course, but everyone was there mostly to connect. Carlos opened the meeting with a short speech. Jim gave a finance update. Elaine talked about the successful coat drive she organized. Then I stood up. I hadn't planned to say much, just a few words to mark the end of the year. But the room was so full of warmth, not just from the heaters, but from the people, that I found myself saying more. I just want to say thank you, I started. A year ago, I didn't think any of this was possible. I thought I'd put up a flag and they'd make me take it down. I thought I'd pay a fine or maybe have a long, boring fight over emails. I didn't think I'd end up standing here, with all of you. The room was quiet. Listening. I put that flag up because it mattered to me. It reminded me of my father. Of what he stood for. And they tried to turn that into a violation. But what they really did, what Cheryl and her old board did, was remind all of us what happens when power goes unchecked. When a small group makes decisions for everyone, without listening. I took a breath. Looked around at the familiar faces, some smiling, some misty-eyed, all part of something that had grown beyond any single person. But what happened next wasn't about me. It was about this place. About people deciding they didn't want to be pushed around anymore. That they didn't want to live in fear of paint chips and garden decorations. That they wanted to know their neighbors. To trust them. To believe this place could be more than a list of rules and fines. There were a few claps, quiet at first. Then more. So yeah, I said, chuckling, they demanded I take down my flag. And now their meetings are held on my lawn. Not because I won, but because we all did. The applause was loud. Longer than I expected. I sat down, and Carlos patted my back with a grin. After the meeting ended, people didn't rush out. They stayed, chatting and sharing stories. A couple I hadn't even met yet came up and thanked me for making the neighborhood feel alive again. That night, when I finally got home, I stood outside for a moment, looking at the flag in the cold wind. It fluttered proudly, the same as it had the day I first put it up. It hadn't changed. But everything else had. I realized then that this wasn't the end of a story. It was the start of something better. A neighborhood reborn, not with banners and speeches, but with small, stubborn acts of integrity. A flag. A meeting. A shared cup of coffee. And above all, a quiet, unwavering belief that no one gets to silence what we stand for, especially not on our own front lawn.